I was desperately looking for a silver lining, and so I said that Trump obviously is a very, very bad man indeed. I mean, very nasty, vindictive, vengeful, narcissistic, self-obsessed, lazy, incompetent, unfit to be president, and stupid as well. But the silver lining is, I said, Elon Musk is not. He is highly intelligent. I get attacked by Christians, I get attacked by Muslims, and now I get attacked by postmodern trans lobbyists and etc. Yeah. And all I try to do is just speak honest science. I also object to the statement that a woman can have a penis. A great many of us reproduce who would not have reproduced in the wild, would not have been allowed to reproduce in the wild. We would have died. And I am actually in favor of that. I like doctors. I like the fact that we do keep each other alive longer than natural selection would wish. So I think it's a price worth paying. If I could wave a magic wand and raise the average IQ of Americans by 10%.
I'm Andrew Gold. I'm a journalist and a YouTuber, which is a strange profession I never thought I would have, but that's what I have. I'm the host of a channel called Heretics, which looks into sort of the culture wars and some of the madness that we face today. Richard Dawkins, you know who Richard Dawkins is, but I'll do a little intro anyway, because he is one of the most influential and thought-provoking minds of our time. An evolutionary biologist, author, and renowned atheist, Dawkins has inspired countless individuals to question assumptions and explore the wonders of science with fresh eyes. His works, such as The Selfish Gene and The God Delusion, and his brilliant new book, The Genetic Book of the Dead, have reshaped how we understand evolution and genetics, where we come from, and where we're going. With a profound dedication to reason, evidence, and intellectual freedom, Dawkins challenges us to seek truth and embrace curiosity. His legacy endures as a beacon for critical thinking and a celebration of humanity's capacity to understand the natural world. Richard Dawkins remains a target of the religious right, but over the years he has also found himself in conflict with parts of the political left. Much like J.K. Rowling, Dawkins has encountered criticism from some progressive groups, particularly for his unflinching views on issues like gender, scientific fact, and free expression. He now faces opposition from those who view his dedication to rational debate as challenging to newer ideological beliefs. Dawkins' journey reflects his steadfast commitment to reason, skepticism, and I'd also say courage, even as he navigates a world where different forms of magical thinking continue to emerge on all sides. He coined the term meme, which we now use for internet memes. He became known as one of the illustrious four horsemen of new atheism, and something to which we all should aspire, he has been parodied by South Park. Please welcome to the stage Richard Dawkins. Hello. Here we are. Richard, what is your star sign?
I will ignore that question.
I thought you might. It was just a test to make sure you're the real Richard Dawkins. Your new book, The Genetic Book of the Dead, which is brilliant, focuses on something called palimpsests. Explain to me what those are and why this theme captivated you.
Right. The thesis of the book is that the animal, any animal, including us, is a book, a work of literature, a description of... I'm getting quite a bit of an echo. I hope is that all right?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Can everyone? I suppose that's important too.
a work of literature describing the worlds in which its ancestors lived. And the reason for that, of course, is that natural selection has worked on the ancestors, worked on the genes of the ancestors, and they're the genes that survive in the animal today. And that's the basis for saying that the genes of the animal and the animal itself is a description of ancestral worlds. But of course, those ancestral worlds date from a very long way back, and then a bit less far back, and then a bit less far back, and so on. It's a palimpsest. A palimpsest is a document which has been erased or partially erased and then written over again, and then erased and written over again. They did that in earlier times because of economy. Remember, they didn't have enough paper or parchment. And that's what the animals, the book of the animal is. It is a palimpsest because it has documents dating from different times in the past.
I see. And could then a scientist of the future, you refer to the SOF, scientist of the future, if they were to access your genes today, your genome, would they be, or in many, many years, would they be able to know not just what you were, but every step of the way before that?
Well, every step of the way would be very optimistic. I would like to think every step of the way, but actually probably not. In any case, we're talking about a scientist of the future. It might be a somewhat patchy palimpsest. Palimpsests are a bit patchy, but in principle, I like to think that we could aspire to having every step of the way.
Can you imagine another competitor to humans? Could we ever inhabit the Earth again and there's some sort of other animal that's achieved in millions of years, I'm saying, our kind of intellectual capacity?
I don't see why not. Of course, it has only happened once, but then, of course, there had to be a first time. And so we wouldn't expect to see any other competitors at the moment. But if we were to die out, then it seems to me reasonable to expect that at some point some other creature might take our place. A first step, I suppose, would be language. You'd have to have language in order to aspire to our level.
If we had to die out, you suggested humans would have to die out, so no longer exist.
Well, I suppose that's right, because it's hard to imagine chimpanzees or something taking over now. But it could be, yes, I think you probably say you have to die out. We'd have to die out.
There's an excellent segment in your book about teaching animals tricks through reward and punishment. To what extent are we as humans beyond that? I suppose it's Pavlovian conditioning. Are we beyond that, or are we still susceptible to it?
I'm talking about here, it's actually not Pavlovian conditioning, it's Skinnerian conditioning. Pavlovian conditioning is the conditioned reflex when an animal comes to associate, say, a bell with food or something like that. Skinnerian conditioning, the animal does something, and then it gets rewarded, and then repeats whatever it is that it's just done. So what was the question again?
Are we also susceptible to that?
Of course, yes. Skinner himself, but B.F. Skinner, who invented this, not invented, but pioneered the advanced versions of this technique, used to sit in the audience in a lecture, in a lecture hall, and he would wait for the lecturer to do something like, for example, touch his ear. And then Skinner would nod vigorously or smile. And that's would be the reward. And Skinner claimed that he could train the lecturer. The lecturer would have no idea why he was doing it, but he would soon turn into an ear-touching maniac because he would be getting these rewards from... It doesn't take much. I mean, it doesn't take food. I mean, a rat in a Skinner box, a pigeon in a Skinner box gets given food when it does something at random, when it pecks a key or when it presses a bar. Or Skinner would wait until the animal did something like scratch its ear, and then he would reward it with food. But with humans, he could do it by just simply nodding his head, looking encouraging, looking friendly. And he claimed it worked.
I'm trying to do it to you now.
Yes.
Is there a kind of beauty or symmetry in the way that animals learn? As you explain in the book, a paw extending over time and getting treats, compared to evolution? It's a little bit, I mean, is that Darwinian in a sense?
It's a very close analogy, I think, to Darwinism. Skinner himself noticed this. The analogy is that in a Skinner box, the animal does something at random, and then it may or may not be rewarded. In nature, the animal might develop a particular colored tail or a particular length of tooth or something of that sort. And then the equivalent of reward is then survival. And so the genes for doing it get passed on. So on a much slower time scale, natural selection favors those random changes, genetic changes, which are called mutation. And that is evolution. Evolution is the non-random survival of random genetic changes. In a Skinner box, there is the non-random survival of random behavior patterns, trial and error. The animal does something at random, and then it gets rewarded, and that causes it to survive. That's the analogy. So there is an analogy there, yes.
One of those assets that I suppose evolved for humans, but also many animals, is imagination. Vicarious trial and error, you write in your book. An amazing way that we're able to see, or an animal is able to see before it jumps over the cliff, what might then happen. With humans, do you think that might be why, for example, women really like true crime? Why men and women watch apocalypse movies about the end of the world? Are we trained to enjoy watching these kinds of things?
I hadn't thought of that. I think it's fair enough to say that imagination is, well, vicarious trial and error, although that particular phrase has been hijacked by psychologists for another use, but let's call it that. So when you imagine possible course of action and you think to yourself, what might happen if I do this? I might get rewarded, I might get punished. If you imagine falling over a cliff, for example, then you see yourself tumbling over the cliff, and that's imagined punishment, and so you refrain from going near the cliff edge. You don't actually have to fall over the cliff. I think we could put together a sort of scenario for various ways in which animals come to avoid falling over cliffs. There would be straight natural selection, where those ancestors that fell over cliffs didn't pass on the genes for falling over cliffs, didn't pass over genes for being foolhardy on the edge of cliffs. And therefore, the ones who stayed away from cliff edges were the ones who reproduced and passed on the genes for being cautious near the edge of cliffs. Then you could imagine reinforcement learning, where animals fall over small cliffs, and they don't kill themselves, but they just hurt themselves. And pain is a kind of vicarious death. Pain is a sort of warning that if you do that again, the next time you fall over a cliff, it might kill you. You fell over a fairly low cliff on this occasion, and you merely suffered a bruise. Next time, it might kill you. And then the third stage would be an animal that imagines itself falling over the cliff, and then it might be a really very high cliff, and you imagine falling over it, and then you refrain from doing so. So these are all different ways in which a kind of trial and error has the desired effect. In the first case, it's genetic trial and error, that's natural selection. In the second case, it's punishment trial and error, vicarious death. And the third stage, it's imagination, sort of second-order vicarious trial and error.
Would it work in a way that it feels good to do the things that help us to continue to pass on our genes?
Definitely. If you ask yourself the question, what is it that defines a reward? To us, it seems obvious that food, for example, is a reward. But food is only a reward because food tends to increase your chances of survival. So a more general definition of a reward would be anything that is likely to increase your survival. And I've used in the book the example of birdsong, where we're not talking about survival now, but reproductive success. So singing the correct song for your species is likely to increase your chances of passing on your genes, not individual survival, but passing on your genes. Because if you sing the correct song of your species, then this impresses females who then mate with you. Well, now, if you look at the way birdsong develops in the individual, when a young male begins to learn to sing, he teaches himself to sing by trial and error. He teaches himself to sing by burbling a random phrase. And if the random phrase corresponds to a built-in template, a built-in preconception of what the song of the species ought to sound like, he repeats it. So by definition, it is a reward. By definition, it's a reward because a reward is anything that if you experience it, it causes you to repeat whatever you've just done. It doesn't have to be food. In this case, it's hearing the correct song of the species when you, not the correct song, the correct fragment of the song of the species when you burble it at random. So the young male bird is born with a genetically specified template for what the song of the species ought to sound like. And he then teaches himself to sing with reference to the template. This has been shown in American song sparrows, and a slightly different version of it in American white crown sparrows, where there is still a template, but it's not built in. In this case of the white crown sparrow, the template is learned, but a different kind of learning. The young white crown sparrow has to hear a male of his own species singing early in life. So early in life, it's as though he makes a kind of tape recording of the song of his father, for example. So he's recorded the song of his father, and then he uses that as the built-in template, not built-in, as the learned template in this case, the recorded template. And he then teaches himself to sing with reference to this template. Now, I think there's something rather interesting about this because I think it suggests to me that these birds have an aesthetic sense. Let me say what I mean by that. So the object of the exercise is to impress a female. The male who is learning to sing, is teaching himself to sing, he is a member of the same species as the female that he's trying to impress. And so isn't it reasonable to suppose that whatever impresses him will impress a female of the species? He's trying it out on himself. As it were, if this fragment of song turns me on, the chances are it'll turn a female on later in life. So the male is trying it out on his own aesthetic sense, trying out what he hopes will be the female's aesthetic sense when he comes to sing in earnest to try to impress a female. I think if that's not an aesthetic sense, I don't know what is.
I was just saying that there are examples in your book of other animals, various animals, that created homes or artistic works that appear to have no practical value.
Oh, yes. Well, I think you may be thinking of bowerbirds.
That's it.
Yes, okay. Bowerbirds, that's much better, thank you. Bowerbirds are Australian and New Guinea birds that they may build nests as well, but in this case they build bowers. Males build a bower, which is a structure, which is not a nest. They don't have eggs laid in it, anything like that. It's not a nest, but it's a structure which impresses females. It may be made of grass, may be made of twigs, and it may look like a sort of great big archway. And females are encouraged to come into this archway where they get mated. And the more beautiful it is, the more impressed females are. And the males will not only build the bower itself, but they will decorate it with colored objects. One species likes blue objects, and it goes out and searches for blue berries, or blue drinking straws, or blue beer bottle tops, which it then distributes in strategic places around the bower. And you can see it almost doing like an and like an artist working on a canvas, it'll pick up a bottle top and put it there and then stand back and look and then, no, it's not quite right, put it there instead, move it around a bit, bunch them up together. It really does look exactly like an artist creating a canvas. And once again, whatever turns this male on, whatever impresses his, in this case, visual sense, not acoustic sense, whatever impresses him visually is likely to impress a female visually. So he's trying it out on himself. He's using his own aesthetic judgment, in this case, visual aesthetic judgment, as a touchstone to see what might impress a female later.
We've created a wonderful society that helps some of maybe the weakest people who might not have survived in the wild. Have we, over a long amount of time, have we maybe made ourselves more susceptible and weaker? Have we stopped what might have been evolution and survival of the fittest?
Yes, we probably have. It's something that I actually don't worry about, or rather, I feel that it's worth it. I feel that I would not wish us to go back to the sharp, cutting-edge knives of natural selection, weeding out those who are not fit to live. That's what used to happen, and the majority of our ancestors probably never made it to adulthood. They probably all died before they got to reproduce. Nowadays, you tend to, if you want to reproduce, you pretty much can, because you reach adulthood. And so probably a great many of us reproduce who would not have reproduced in the wild, who would not have been allowed to reproduce in the wild. We would have died. I am actually in favor of that. I like doctors. I like the fact that we do keep each other alive longer than natural selection would wish. So I think it's a price worth paying.
Do you ever sit up at night and think about just the absolute abject horror of natural selection and the pain and suffering from countless animals and things?
Darwin did. He actually said that he I think, always remember his exact words. He said something like, I cannot conceive that a beneficent deity would have knowingly created the Ichneumonidae. Now, the Ichneumonidae are a family of wasps which lay their eggs in prey, like caterpillars, and before they do that, they sting them, but they don't sting them to death. They sting them to paralyze them, so that when they lay their egg in the caterpillar, and when the larvae hatch out, they eat the caterpillar from within. And the point about stinging it to paralyze it, rather than stinging it to death, is to keep it fresh. So it is alive. It's being eaten alive from within, and that's important. If it was dead, it would decay and would not be good food. This horrified Darwin, and as I say, he thought he couldn't believe in a beneficent God who could create the Ichneumonidae. There are lots of other parasitoid wasps as well. It's a very common habit. I think that suffering is indeed an integral part of natural selection. If a wild animal is not suffering, then there's something wrong, because it ought to be suffering for the cause of reproducing and passing on its genes. I think that suffering is an inherent, necessary consequence of natural selection. And it is horrifying.
It is. It really is. In the Genetic Book of the Dead, you write that Europeans, but not Africans, descend from mating with Neanderthals. If it were found conclusively that different races had different IQs, I know that the study of that seems to be a bit verboten. Is that something you think should be released to the world? Should people know? Is there anything science should keep back?
Yes. Should scientists ever suppress their work? I can't decide about that. I think the important thing, I think, is not to if you did say study IQ and discover that there was a statistical tendency for certain races to be have higher IQs than others. I'm not saying that's the case, by the way. That's just suppose you did find that. The important thing is not to base any policy on that, not to say because you belong to this or that group, therefore we should treat you differently. We should always treat you as an individual and never treat people according to the group to which they belong.
Do you think that, and you don't have to say which one, but that it is likely that things like IQ might be different in different races?
I'd be surprised if it was. I think that there might very well be differences in certain characteristics. It seems unlikely to me that IQ would be one, but there could be other things that are different. Because so many things are genetically determined, it wouldn't be surprising.
I was speaking recently with some geneticists, those people who are trying to make babies more intelligent. Do you know what I mean? That trying to raise the IQ of people's children. And there was a great debate I watched where one person was saying, we need to do this as a society, and other people were saying, well, hang on, if you do that with intelligence, there are all sorts of different problems that we can have. What are your views on that?
If I could wave a magic wand and raise the average IQ of Americans by 10%.
Richard.
The world would not be in the predicament it now finds itself in. There are people who make objection to measures that, perhaps rather futuristic measures that might increase IQ or allow people to have so-called designer babies, babies to a certain specification, very musical babies or something of that sort. One objection to it is that it would be a privilege of the rich, and so you tend to get increasing inequality as the rich would become more prosperous and better equipped. If you could overcome that difficulty, I think it would be, if you could wave a magic wand and increase average IQ, I'd be for it.
One of the issues that they spoke about, I'm coming from a layperson perspective here, was that apparently some genes come with other things. So if you increase intelligence, it comes with low fertility, just as one example.
There is that risk that when you select, for example, for one characteristic, you tend to unbalance the animal. For example, selecting racehorses for great speed, that tends to select for long, spindly legs, which makes them vulnerable to being broken. And so it's very difficult to get the balance. Nature tends to get the balance right, because in nature, if there were, of course, there is selection in nature from predators to run fast in wild horses and similar herbivores, but that goes with a corresponding counter-selection against having legs that break too easily, because if you may be a very fast runner when you're running away from a lion, but if you break your leg, the lion gets you anyway. And so there has to be this constant balance between alternative opposing selection pressures.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to find that we were in some sort of dystopian future where we can't have children, but we're intelligent.
Yes, I believe it's right that bulldogs can no longer be born naturally. Is that right?
I don't know.
That they have to be born by cesarean.
I see. And I suppose there's also the issue, I mean, it might be, perhaps, that we are just the right kind of intelligence for our environment and our society. I read a great book called The Intelligence Trap about people who are so smart they're able to sort of take themselves and convince themselves of any kind of narrative. I don't want to criticize because he's not here and it's not fair, but Jordan Peterson, I know you've had these conversations with him, where it feels like he's almost so smart that he's able to convince himself of dragons sort of existing.
Would you call it smart?
Well, he's intelligent, isn't he?
Well, I'm not quite sure what point you're making then.
That if often intelligence can. Okay, Arthur Conan Doyle was a good example, that Sherlock writer, that he was able to convince himself that fairies were real.
That's a very strange case, because Conan Doyle was a doctor, and he was his two great heroes. I mean, Sherlock Holmes himself and Professor Challenger, the great scientist, his fictional scientist. They were both highly skeptical scientific minds, and yet Conan Doyle himself believed in fairies, and he was convinced by a pair of young girls, pair of cousins, who photographed, they got pictures of fairies and cut them out, little cardboard fairies, and hung them up in flower beds, and took photographs of themselves sporting with these cardboard cut-out fairies. And Conan Doyle was fooled and wrote a book called The Coming of the Fairies. I suppose nowadays we're so used to Photoshop and the ease with which the camera can lie. We forget that there was a time when people thought the camera couldn't lie.
I think he thought that the pins that held up the fairies by their stomachs, he thought that was a belly button, and so evidence that they could give birth, fairies. And he had these arguments with Houdini, I think. So I wonder if we had a more intelligent society, it's one of those sort of careful what you wish for, because we might go even more politically diverse and mad.
Yes, I doubt that. I think that, I wonder whether Conan Doyle was all that intelligent.
Well, he's not here to defend himself either. I saw a wonderful video where you spoke about where the gay gene might have come from. And I think there were three theories. The gay gene, homosexual gene.
Yeah. You saw a video about that?
You were speaking with somebody about it on YouTube.
Was I?
Yes. You said there were three theories.
Okay, I'm quite often asked about gay genes because if there is a genetic tendency towards homosexuality in males, say, then it's a little bit hard to understand from a Darwinian point of view, because you might think that the gay gene would not get passed on. And so the first question is it in fact hereditary? And there is some evidence that it is. There is some evidence that if you take monozygotic twins, identical twins, if one of them is gay, then there's it's statistically rather likely that the other one will be too. It's not inevitable, but there is a statistical tendency, and it does show that there probably is a genetic predisposition towards sexuality. Well, then we have a problem. We have a Darwinian problem. I think the three theories you might be thinking of are the worker bee theory. The worker bees, as you know, are sterile, but they pass on copies of their genes. They assist copies of their genes by looking after their young siblings and nephews and nieces. And so it's possible that something like homosexual uncles could assist their genes by looking after their nephews and nieces. That's one theory. Another theory is the theory that suggests that when dominant harem-holding males in our wild ancestors went hunting, they wanted to leave the women and children behind under the protection of males that they could trust. And so ostentatious homosexuality might have been a badge of trustworthiness from the point of view of the harem holder, that while his back was turned, his females would not be taken over by males that were left behind in the camp. And so homosexuality might have got passed on because these apparently homosexual males could in fact have been bisexual. And so then there could have been some opportunity for genes to flow from them into the population while the harem holders were not looking. This kind of thing is sort of known in some animals like seals and sea lions, where you have so-called beach masters who hold harems on a beach, and there are other males hanging around who occasionally attempt a quick sneak copulation while the harem holder isn't looking. I suppose you could also point to human harem holders, sultans, who had eunuchs looking after the harem. Well, a eunuch is absolutely safe from their point of view, but before castration was invented, they might have thought that gay men were secure in that kind of way. So that's the second theory. The third one is the one I actually favor, which is that when you talk about a gene for anything, you always only mean a gene for that thing in a particular environmental context. So it could be that there is no gene that absolutely makes you gay under all circumstances. It could be that there's a gene that makes you gay under some environmental conditions but not others. And a possible hypothetical example would be if you're bottle fed and you have this gene, then you're more likely to be gay, but if you're breastfed, you're not. So before bottle feeding was invented, this so-called gay gene would not have been a gay gene at all. It would have just been a gene for something else. And then when bottle feeding was invented, it manifested itself in a different way. I use bottle feeding purely as a hypothetical example. It could be any environmental change, of which there are numerous possibilities. I mean, we live in a totally different kind of environment now from that in which our wild ancestors lived, in that in which our genes were naturally selected over most of our history.
I can imagine a lot of the audience just imagining if a switch were flipped a little bit differently, perhaps I would have been gay or straight, and
yes,
all different.
That's the idea. Yes.
That second theory about the sort of sneaky copulation has a name that people call it, a bit of a rude name, doesn't it? It's got a rude name, the one about the second theory.
Yes, I think I won't.
You don't want to repeat it?
No.
Okay. The sneaky copulator,
yes,
we can say. Okay. One of the policies or behaviours of which you've been critical is Maori ways of knowing. What are Maori ways of knowing?
I came across this in New Zealand about a year ago, and now I suppose it is, when I found myself rushing headlong into a controversy. The then Labour government in New Zealand had implemented an education policy in which science classes were to be taught Maori so-called ways of knowing as of equal status to what they call Western science, which just means science. And so this is in the interest of sort of showing respect to the indigenous population that were indigenous for a couple of centuries before the British arrived in New Zealand. And so, of course, nobody could object to teaching Maori folklore or as history of New Zealand, but to teach it as science is dubious to say the least. And a group of distinguished New Zealand scientists got together and wrote a letter to a New Zealand journal called The Listener, and they then were ostracized in various ways for this heresy, and several of them were fellows of the New Zealand Royal Society, and they were threatened with expulsion from the New Zealand Royal Society. When I visited New Zealand, I was invited to lunch to speak to this group of scientists and was briefed by them. One of them had his lectures cancelled. He wasn't allowed to lecture to students because it was thought to be students were said to feel unsafe in his presence because he objected to teaching Maori folklore as science. I felt very strongly about this, and I altered the form of my talks to reflect it, and it went down quite well. I think the audiences that I spoke to seemed to agree. There's a new government in New Zealand. I think they haven't yet quite repealed that rather short-sighted policy.
What do you believe leads to this kind of bending of intellectuals to less profound or robust sources of knowledge, especially, as you say, because most people seem to want real science?
Yes, I mean, real science works. If there was some scientific value in Maori ways of knowing, then it should be taught over the whole world, not just in New Zealand, because science is universally true. And so if there is something to be learned from New Zealand folklore in the way of science, then let it be taught to everybody. But the giveaway is that it's only taught in New Zealand, and that gives away that the real motive is nothing to do with science. The motive is to show respect to an indigenous population, but showing the wrong kind of respect.
You've been previously hated by the religious right. Now some of the science community and the culture on the left are against you as well. You lost your Humanist of the Year award. I want to ask you how that actually feels. And I know it's hard to ask a feelings question to a scientist, but I think it's worth exploring because you're going through something that I believe is part of our biological evolution in being kicked out of the tribe.
I seem to get it coming all ways, yes. I get attacked by Christians, I get attacked by Muslims, and now I get attacked by postmodern trans lobbyists and etc.
Yeah.
And all I try to do is just speak honest science, and I believe in scientific truth, and I think that scientific truth is desperately important. Skeptical, critical thinking, desperately important, and it seems to be under attack from all sides. Both.
That applause means I can really go for it now, right? The reason I ask about the emotional side of it is because, I mean, this has happened to me. For agreeing with you about gender, I had a book out, The Psychology of Secrets, about nothing to do with any of those things, but because I had said things about, men are men and so on, every single bookshop where I was supposed to do a talk, including at the Tate Museum, cancelled and wouldn't...
Seriously?
Oh, yeah, off, done. And even though part of me is going, okay, I know I'm right about this, and I have a lot of friends, and my wife and everyone, are very supportive, it really hurt. Reading the emails from my publisher, I'm really sorry, they've cancelled.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Tell me more, because I feel it's very sympathetic. What have you written that gives offence?
I've done many interviews on my YouTube channel, including one with you a few years ago. We said that Piers Morgan was a fool on it, and Piers got upset. Oh, no. That was the audience saying it and me recollecting it. That wasn't me reiterating that opinion about Piers. But many of the videos are with people like Helen Joyce, who interviewed you the other day, who just say, and the titles will be "Trans women are not women," if that's the way, yeah. That's the right way around, yes. And my publisher had to say to me, I'm so sorry. And it was very frustrating. This is all going to be about me now, the next 20 minutes.
Well, I'd like to know, so
okay.
Yeah.
Well, this started only a few years after. I used to make documentaries for TV. So you've seen my exorcism one for the BBC. And they then told me, all the production companies, that because I was a white man, I could no longer be on screen. I had to be off screen, and somebody who was a minority had to be in my place doing my journalistic work. So I left that and did my YouTube page, and yes, spoke about gender, Islam, all of the things that get you in trouble. And I got in trouble. That was it.
And your publisher has been pressured into suppressing?
Well, they haven't as such. It's my publisher, so that was Pan Macmillan, and they had to be the messenger. And they had to say, well, at first, we're very excited, the Tate want you here, this festival wants you, and so on. And then, so sorry, Andrew, the Tate has just pulled out. So sorry, this one has. And then every single one pulled out. And I just thought it was so crazy, because most people would have come for my book about psychology and secrets, not about the trans stuff. It wasn't even mentioned.
I'm shocked at that. I'm very sorry about that.
But are you shocked, given the way our society is going?
I think what happens, forgive me if I'm wrong, that there are one or two young people in the organization who start making a fuss.
Yeah.
And the people who run the show are too cowardly to stand up to them.
Yeah.
Is that what happens?
Yeah, I think so. Another thing, I was supposed to do a on-stage show with Konstantin from Trigonometry, Konstantin Kissin, and we just couldn't find a theatre that would have us in England, in London. They just wouldn't have us, and a lot of the time it was, we're so sorry, but we have dancers and things, many of whom are trans, and they would be offended to know we'd let you be on our stage.
A few days ago, I was in Manchester and appearing on stage with Helen Joyce, whom you just mentioned, who is a fairly strong advocate of women's rights as opposed to trans rights. And I mean, that was not billed to appear on our discussion at all and did not appear in our discussion. But we were warned, the venue, the equivalent of the theatre, told us that they were expecting a demonstration of 50 people, and therefore they would have to lay on 13 extra security guards, which we would have to pay for. So we said, well, if you really think you need 13 extra security guards, why not get the police if there's a credible threat? Isn't that what the police are for? And they said, no, the police won't touch it. Or if they do, they'll charge you.
Wow.
So I'm not sure what happened in the end, but except I do know that not a single demonstrator turned up. And almost certainly what happened was that probably one or two individuals within the organization, probably young people, pretended there was going to be a demonstration to try to shut it down. And there wasn't a demonstration, everything went perfectly well. If there were 13 extra security guards, they had nothing to do, they were unemployed.
Well, maybe that's what it was about. It was a racket. They wanted to get some money out of you.
Yeah.
I think. So, again, the moment they tell you, Humanist of the Year award, we're taking that away, you're not welcome here anymore, how does that feel for you?
Well, actually, I'd forgotten I ever had the Humanist Award.
I wish I had felt that way when I had this horrible day of cancer. But I think that great, screw them.
But nevertheless, I mean, it does hurt when it comes from your own people. I don't mind getting vilification from religious nuts, whether it's Christian or Muslim. I get it from both. But I do mind more when it comes from what I think of as my own people.
That's how I feel as well.
Yes.
And this started. What was it you said about gender that caused such a fuss?
Well, I tell you exactly what it was. I compared the praise that people get, the popularity they get if they switch sex, against the vilification that they get if they try to switch race. And I thought this was a bit strange because race really is a spectrum. In America, where this all happens, of course, so-called African Americans are a complete spectrum from jet black on the one hand to the Duchess of Sussex on the other. Yes. So there really is a spectrum. Race is not binary. Sex is binary. And therefore, on the face of it, you might think it would be easier to pretend to be a different race than to pretend to be a different sex. And yet it goes the other way around. And so I didn't actually even say this. I said discuss. I wrote a tweet that said, on the one hand, Rachel Dolezal, that was the name of this a woman who in America wanted to be black. She was white, but she felt black. She wanted to be black, just like people want to be the opposite sex. And so she did her hair differently and lived her life as though she was black. And she was vilified and persecuted and told she was insane and mad. But on the other hand, people who do exactly the same thing with sex get supported, and I said, I pointed out this discrepancy, this double standard, and then said discuss. And well, you can't discuss that. When you discussion is against the rules.
Well, we can,
Yes.
and so let's.
Yes.
And is there any credible evidence, anything you've seen to suggest there might be something in the, say, the male mind, the male brain, that is actually female sometimes?
I suppose so, yes. I mean, there are all sorts of dimensions, psychological dimensions that you can classify people on. You can classify them on aggressive and passive and various other things. And you could say that some people have a more female kind of mind than other people have. And there are people, I think, who actually genuinely suffer from a feeling that they were born in the wrong body. And I've quoted the case of Jan Morris, who wrote a book called Conundrum. She was James Morris. He was James Morris. And he was the only journalist on the first successful Everest expedition. But he always felt that he was actually born in the wrong body and wanted to be a woman, and became a woman in his mind, in her mind, wrote a book under the name Jan Morris. She had hormone treatment, she had surgery, and was spent the rest of her life as a woman, and eventually ended up remarrying the woman who, the mother of the children that he'd originally fathered. And I have great sympathy with Jan Morris, and her book moved me very much when I read it, way back in the 1960s or 70s, whenever it first came out. So I do have sympathy for those people, just as I have sympathy for anorexics who are deluded into thinking that they're fat when actually they're terribly thin. What I object to, though, is usurping women's hard-won rights and men with male physique entering women's sports events and carrying off women's medals. I strongly object to that, and women object to that. And I also object to the statement that a woman can have a penis, which is absolute nonsense. And when a person with a penis goes marching into a woman's changing room and strips off, thereby alarming the women, I think that's disgraceful.
That was an accident, by the way, that I did before. I didn't mean to go in those changing rooms, Richard. I'm joking. Was someone booing, or was it as a sort of the extra yes? I don't know what it was. A sort of goatee noise or goat. I don't know. And people can boo, can't they? I'm speaking with Ayaan Hirsi Ali in a few days, and I was with you in Dissident Dialogues, which was out in New York, and you had this wonderful debate. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for those who don't know, is an ex-Muslim who I think she had a fatwa put on her. Is that right?
Oh yes, She made a film. Well, she escaped from Somalia, where she had been subject to genital mutilation, a horrible procedure, and then she had an arranged marriage to a cousin she'd never met, and she managed to escape. She escaped from Somalia and went to Germany, and then she went to the Netherlands, to Holland, where she learned Dutch and became elected a member of parliament in Holland. Then she made a film with a filmmaker called Theo van Gogh, and it was taking the lid off the Islamic cruelty to women. And Theo van Gogh was murdered, stabbed in the street, and the knife went through a message in his chest, which was pinned to his chest with this knife, which said, "Ayaan, you're next." And she then left the Netherlands and went to America, where she became an American citizen, and where she now lives. And she then became a Christian recently, in the last few months. And I had a debate with her, the one you just referred to, in New York, in which I was rather wrong-footed, because I had thought that she was what I would call a political Christian. I thought that she thought that Christianity was a bulwark against Islam, which she'd suffered from so much in her own life. I quoted Hilaire Belloc, always keep a hold of nurse for fear of finding something worse. But it turned out that actually she really is a Christian, and she's a convert, and she goes to church every Sunday and actually believes it, which I find astonishing, but she does.
It was really extraordinary to be there. We're all sitting there, and there were a lot of fellow writers and thinkers in the crowd, and academics and YouTubers as well were there watching. And it was just amazing to see these two, I suppose, titans of this industry, if you can call it that. And you, as you said, you were totally wrong. You were totally surprised, I think. I
was totally surprised. Yes.
She saw.
So God. I had to sort of backtrack, because I was prepared to debate about being a political Christian, for which I would have great sympathy. But then she said she'd suffered from depression, and that Christian prayer had pulled her out of depression, and she seemed to be totally sincere.
Is there then something, and I'm sure you've been asked this before, but something inherent to most humans, or many humans, that needs religion? It seemed to make her happier.
That's possible. It wouldn't surprise me. What does surprise me is that anybody who could argue that because it makes you feel good, it's therefore true. Nothing to do with it. I mean, either it's true or it's not, and whether it makes you feel good is totally irrelevant.
I wish it was, though.
Well, exactly. You wish it was. But you're too sensible to say, because I wish it was, therefore it is.
Yeah. No, I am. I just, you know what? I've asked you this before, and I'm waiting for somebody to make me not worry about death. I'm waiting for somebody to give me something that, and I've heard you speak about it, and you've said it's a good thing that we can't live forever. But to me, I don't know what the solution is.
Yes. Well, of course. I mean, but the fact that you don't like the idea of death doesn't, as you quite right to realize, it doesn't make it go away.
I met someone recently who said that they're working on taking your head off and putting it on another body to live forever.
Yeah, I wouldn't put much money on that.
He was deadly serious, though.
Yeah.
So, and I am, you know, that's what my faith will do. So my faith, I will tell myself, in the next few years, they'll invent something, and I'll live forever. And I don't think about it beyond that. I suppose that's my faith, allowing myself to think ridiculousness.
Could you tolerate it, really? I mean, living forever? Not just 200 years. I could go for 200 years, but forever? Blimey.
Yeah.
You're terribly bored.
Just lots of these, Richard. You'd be doing them everywhere, every day, for eternity. Yeah. Why is Islam different to maybe Christianity and Judaism in terms of it being dangerous? Why is Islam different to Judaism?
Sorry, I didn't get that at all.
Why might Islam be different to Judaism and Christianity?
Well, the penalty for apostasy is death. Christianity doesn't do that. Judaism doesn't do that. I mean, what kind of a religion is it that's so insecure that if you depart from it, you get killed? Pathetic.
Yeah.
Then the treatment of gay people, the treatment of women, the prohibition against fun of any kind in extreme places like where the Taliban hold sway. You can't dance, you can't sing. It's just a joyless, horrible existence in those extreme places. Of course, that's not true in many in many places.
These things were once true, perhaps, of Christianity, were they? If you left, you were an apostate and so on.
Well, yes, but back in the Middle Ages, yeah.
Gosh, I want to go on about this for ages, but we're just getting to the bit where somebody tweeted me in the break, and they said that apparently you're an Aries.
I didn't hear that.
Aries, you're Aries star sign.
Who cares?
So, and apparently all of the 4 horsemen are Aries.
So fucking what?
And so am I. Come on, I've convinced you. No, obviously not. It's ridiculous. We had a heckler, I believe. I've been informed it was a heckler, and I think it's. Firstly, I thought it was strange because I thought Richard spoke so beautifully and fairly about the trans issue, and that was the moment they went brr and left. And it was odd, but also how wonderful that we have a society where they are able to express their that's not a word, but their unhappiness with the situation. So fair enough, and it's a shame that they couldn't stay to ask a question because that would have been interesting and been good for YouTube and those kinds of things. Right, Richard, first question here, and I love it. It's even written Northern Irishly with this. I mean, you guys speak like how Shakespeare. I mean, that's how you're supposed to. With that, have you? You start with have you instead of do you have. And I wish we all did that. But have you a preferred explanation for the fine-tuning of the universe, e.g., multiverse, simulation, anthropic?
And what?
Anthropic? I don't know.
Yes.
Yes.
The fine-tuning of the universe is very interesting. It has been suggested by various physicists that the fundamental constants of physics, of which there are half a dozen or so, these are numbers which physicists can measure, but they have no explanation for, rationale for, that if any of these numbers was ever so slightly different, then the universe as we know it wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be here. If you think of these as half a dozen knobs, like rheostats that you could twiddle, different tunings, then the suggestion is that if any of these half dozen or so knobs was tuned ever so slightly different, there are things like the gravitational constant, things like that, then we wouldn't have galaxies, we wouldn't have stars, we wouldn't have chemistry, we wouldn't have life, we wouldn't have us. And so by the, there are various possible explanations for this. One is that we simply don't know enough. And that, I think, is the explanation, not an explanation at all. And that, I think, is the answer favored by the brilliant Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman. We just don't know. Another one is the multiverse. Here the idea is that there's a multiverse of universes. There are millions of universes which all have different tunings of these knobs. They're different values of the fundamental constants. And we have to be in one of that minority of universes in which the knobs are fine-tuned, happen to be fine-tuned to exactly the right values to bring us into existence. That's the anthropic principle coming in there. The anthropic principle, we are here, we could only be in the kind of universe which could give rise to us. And therefore, in a multiverse, the explanation is that of all possible universes, we are in one of the tiny minority that is capable of giving rise to us. That, I think, is favored by possibly the majority of physicists. There's a variant of the multiverse theory, which is due to the physicist Lee Smolin, American physicist Lee Smolin, which is a kind of Darwinian version of the multiverse theory. And this is that it's not that there are just a whole lot of different universes, but rather universes give birth to baby universes. So this is where the Darwinian idea comes in. Universes give birth to baby universes in black holes, and the qualities that make for a successful universe that lasts a long time obviously are naturally selected, because those universes are around for a long time, and therefore they can give birth to yet more baby grandchildren universes, etc. So there's a kind of natural selection of universes in favor of those universes that don't fizzle out immediately they're born and last long enough to make galaxies and stars and matter and elements and chemistry and ultimately life. So that's the Lee Smolin version of the multiverse theory. I think it's not favored by very many physicists, but one or two do take it seriously.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
You see Darwin everywhere. Really.
Yes, yes.
Wow. Is it true you said Elon Musk was a force for good? Why?
Oh, yeah, okay. I tweeted, I was desperately seeking a silver lining to the recent catastrophic American election. And I read an article in The Guardian which said that the real power behind Trump is what they call the tech bros, meaning Elon Musk and similar technical wizards. And I was desperately looking for a silver lining, and so I said that Trump obviously is a very, very bad man indeed. I mean, a very nasty, vindictive, vengeful, narcissistic, self-obsessed, lazy, incompetent, unfit to be president, and stupid as well. But the silver lining is, I said, Elon Musk is not. He is highly intelligent. I have sat with him on a transatlantic plane and had a very, very long conversation with him. He's undoubtedly highly intelligent and knowledgeable. I've had lunch with him on 2 or 3 occasions, and so I know him a little bit. And I have formed a very favorable impression of his intelligence and his knowledge and his concern for the welfare of the world, whereas Trump is concerned for the welfare of, first of all, Trump, and secondly, America, but not the world. So it may have been an exaggeration, it may be pie-in-the-sky wishful thinking, but I was clinging to some sort of hope.
I wonder if having somebody who is so seemingly obviously selfish and potentially psychopathic in charge of America might actually be good. Maybe, I think was it Nixon's theory of a madman or something, having a madman leader? This was
advanced with respect to Nixon, I think, that it was at the time of the height of the Cold War when we were depending upon, we were led to believe we were depending upon mutually assured destruction and terror on both sides. And the idea was that you need to have somebody who is pretty much insane in charge of the great powers, because only they would be capable of responding to a nuclear attack with nuclear retaliation. No sane person would retaliate. And so I think that's the mad president theory.
I suppose that's what I'm clinging to now. Maybe it's.
I prefer a more optimistic thing to cling to than that.
And that's Elon Musk. I agree. What was Christopher Hitchens like?
I can't say that I knew him all that well. I probably met him about as often as I met Elon Musk, actually, which would be a few times sharing a platform in debates, that kind of thing. I had dinner with a very nice dinner with him on one occasion. So I wasn't one of his close inner circle of friends like Salman Rushdie or Martin Amis. So I can't really speak to that. My knowledge of him is as a public person, as probably the greatest orator I ever heard. I mean, a magnificent speaker, public speaker, with a wonderful resonant voice and an ability to hold his own without notes, with an inexhaustible fund of knowledge, experience from war zones around the world, and we shall never see his like again.
Well, I think that's an applause as much for what you said as for Christopher Hitchens himself. People just love Christopher Hitchens, and rightly so. What do you think of, say, Douglas Murray as a speaker?
Well, Douglas Murray is very eloquent as well. I don't agree with much of what he believes in, but he's a terrific public intellectual, and he knows a lot. He speaks a lot of sense, and I agree with him on a lot of things.
Do you feel like the world is more or less ignorant now than when you started your work?
I have not done the research. I don't know. If I gave an opinion, it would be my own personal opinion, and who cares for that?
Some people.
You have to do the research. You have to do the sociological, psychological research.
How might you even measure ignorance?
I think you can do research on what people know about science. I mean, people get asked, for example, do you know how long it takes the Earth to orbit the Sun? And a significant proportion of the British people, I think it's something like 19%, 20 years ago, thought it took 1 month for the Earth to orbit the Sun. And so there was a lot of ignorance then. For all I know, there's a lot of ignorance still.
I would like to think that this is a feeling that people are less ignorant now about those kinds of things, maybe.
I would like to know, actually. I mean, maybe that the research is out there.
Interesting. Hi, Richard. How do you account for the rise of Christian fundamentalism, especially in the USA? And do you think its present surge will abate anytime soon? Katie Miss Kelly.
Well, I'm not sure that there's a current surge in it. I mean, I think that it's been there for a long time. And I think, if anything, it's decreasing. That here I do know some of the data. There are Gallup polls which suggest that Christian fundamentalism is decreasing in America.
Interesting. I suppose it depends where, doesn't it? I mean, I know they asked about USA. In the UK, certainly religion seems to be on the decline.
It certainly is, and all throughout Western Europe and America, but it's just that in America they're lagging behind.
And the Middle East, North Africa.
Yes, well, that's another matter, yes.
Is that something you're concerned about?
Yes, but I get to hear, I only get anecdotal evidence, but I do get a lot of, shall we say, vibes from Iran especially, to suggest that there are undercurrents in Iran against the dominance of Islam.
The people pushing against
it. Yes, but again, I have no hard data on that.
It was only 50 years ago or so, it was quite a liberal, open, well, relatively, it wasn't quite as religious.
That's right, yes. I'm not sure about liberal, but it certainly was much less religious, yes.
Can you see that happening to the UK? Becoming religious in the way that Lebanon and Iran did?
Becoming religious?
Perhaps Islamic. Controversial question.
Oh, please, no. I mean, no, surely not.
Okay. Yeah. Do you believe, Oh no. Do you believe in karma, or do bad people get away with their actions?
Could you speak more slowly?
Do you believe in karma, or do bad people get away with their actions?
I think I do not believe in karma. If by karma you mean that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, why on earth should that be true?
I suppose, okay, I'm going to try and look at it from a scientific angle. And I don't know anything about science, so bear with me. But evolutionarily speaking, I imagine that tribes will have done better had everybody done what was good for everybody else. And if they did bad things in the tribe, you would be ostracized and kicked out.
Oh, yes, but now you're producing a rational explanation for why good things should happen. I mean, that I could accept, but karma, isn't that something mystical?
I think it is, but I suppose for the benefit of the doubt, is there a biological way of looking at that?
Well, I could imagine that there could easily be some sort of effect whereby good people are popular with other people and therefore good things happen to them. But that's not karma. That's people being nice to people.
I fell out with a friend of mine because he and I are both determinists, but I believe there's no such thing as altruism because it feels good to do good things. Alex O'Connor, who interviewed you twice for this tour, I asked him about this, and he said, think of a fireman or fire person who would put out a fire or whatever, and they save a child, they go outside, and they're asked on TV, why did you do that? And they say, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. I couldn't live with myself. So is that altruism? Is there such thing as true altruism, or does it just feel good to us, so we do good things?
I think it's very hard to make that distinction. And it's I can see it. I can see arguing both ways, and I would get tied in knots if I tried to argue that.
Yeah, it was crazy. My friend and I really went at each other about this. I was like, there's no such thing, and he didn't agree.
Yeah.
As somebody who isn't a biologist, very much an amateur, are there any upcoming discoveries or research you would say to keep your eye on?
Well, I think we may be coming up to an understanding of the origin of life, which is a big mystery, and it would be nice to have that solved.
How are they doing that? Is there a way to explain that to lay people?
You can't actually demonstrate it, but I think the best we could hope for would be a model, a theory which has the ring of plausibility to it, to such an extent that you don't doubt it.
Where are we now with that? What's the theory?
I think the dominant theory at the moment is the so-called RNA world, where RNA was the precursor to DNA. The origin of life had to be the origin of the first self-replicating molecule. And DNA is the dominant self-replicating molecule we have on Earth today. But DNA can't, it's very hard to imagine how DNA could spontaneously come into existence, because DNA needs enzymes in order to replicate. RNA is a moderately good replicator like DNA. It's not as good as DNA, but it's only a moderately good replicator, but it also can act as an enzyme, as a catalyst, which is what protein is very good at. So the system we have now is that enzymes, which are proteins, are programmed by DNA, and DNA needs enzymes, and so that's a catch-22. But RNA can do both jobs, can be both a replicator and an enzyme. A rather poor replicator and a rather poor enzyme, but nevertheless possibly adequate enough to catalyze itself. And therefore, that might be the first self-replicating molecule.
It'd be fascinating to get an actual definitive answer on that.
Well, it's not definitive. That's very hypothetical. Yeah.
What do you make of the evidence for the existence of God posited by Ayaan Hirsi Ali, i.e. that prayer transformed her life? Roger Thompson.
Evidence transformed her life. anything that transforms your life is not evidence for anything. It's just transforms your life. What we need is, if you wanted evidence for God, you'd need to look for, how can I put it, evidence for God.
There's a wonderful writer called A.J. Jacobs, and he does these sort of kooky journalistic experiments, and he decided to live an entire year like the Old Testament. So he would come home and his wife would, to annoy him, his wife would sit on every chair while she was menstruating, and it meant he wasn't able to sit on any chairs in the house. And he said he stoned adulterers. He found somebody in Central Park and spoke with them, and they said they had committed adultery, and he threw stones at that person. So he's quite funny. But he said, remarkably, he obviously had to pray a lot. That's part of the whole gig. And he did so many times that he came upon some semblance of belief. And I don't think he believes now, but it stood out as remarkable to me, and perhaps it's something human about us. Just through repetition, he was able to create a kind of belief.
Who is this?
An American journalist called A.J. Jacobs.
He sounds very gullible to me.
Yeah, I suppose. What do you like/dislike about Northern Ireland?
The people are so wonderful.
Yeah. What about something you like?
I arrived today.
Can you talk about the place of the Ancestor's tale in your work, Paul?
The place of the Ancestor's tale in
Your work.
my work. It's a book that I wrote in 2 editions, in both cases in collaboration with Yan Wong, and about 10 years apart. It is a history of life, but it goes backwards. Normally history is done forwards, and the advantage of going backwards is that if doing evolution of life you go forwards, you rather tend to give the false impression that the whole of evolution is aimed towards a culminating point, which is likely to be human. And that's, of course, wrong. Every creature that is alive today is a culminating point, temporally culminating point, and every creature is entitled to regard itself as the culminating point of evolution. But because we're human, we do like to think of human evolution. And so what Yan Wong and I did was to do it backwards, starting with humans and then going to our most recent ancestors and then slightly further back and so on. We did it in the form of a Canterbury Tales, a pilgrimage, a Canterbury Tales type pilgrimage to the past, to the origin of life. So our conceit was that we set off as a band of human pilgrims, setting off from the present, marching into the past. 6 million years into the past, we meet a band of chimpanzee pilgrims who've been independently going on their pilgrimage from their starting point. And then a couple of million years further into the past, we meet the gorilla pilgrims. And then a bit further into the past, we meet the orangutan pilgrims, and so on. There are only about 30 of these points where we meet other pilgrims, because some of them are very large numbers of pilgrims indeed. Most of the invertebrates join at one point, for example. And we made the comparison with Chaucer's Canterbury Tales a bit more vivid by having tales at each of the so-called rendezvous points where we meet these pilgrims. 1 or 2 of the pilgrims is allowed to tell a tale. Actually, we, the authors, told the tale. But it was a tale either about the animals that have just joined or a general biological message which was particularly apposite to the pilgrims who had just joined. It's the largest book I've written, the most work, the one that most nearly drove me to distraction and to give up. And it was Yan Wong's entry into it that actually saved me, although I couldn't have done it without him.
Have you any thoughts of what is the end of the universe? Chris McClintock, the end of the universe.
No, I'm not a cosmologist, and I know that they consider various alternative possible ends of the universe, and my friend Lawrence Krauss discusses all of these, and I'm not qualified to do so.
I've got one more question, but afterwards, those of you who are coming afterwards, you've got instructions, I think, so just follow those instructions. Basically, it's a meet and greet with Richard, get hold of his book. I think you're signing them. Do you sign them?
Yes, this is people who have the VIP ticket, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, you sign them. I'm selling a few copies of my book, The Psychology of Secrets. Got 4 copies, so you've got to get there quick. Yeah. And it's not as good as Richard's book, but you can get 2 books. Yeah, anyway, so do that. Remember that. And Richard, this is something I ask on my YouTube channel, Heretics. Who is a heretic that you admire?
Who is a heretic?
Yeah, a heretic that you admire.
Oh, a heretic that I admire. Well, I suppose Christopher Hitchens. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good answer, yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much. So thank you to all of you. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll see some of you afterwards. Thank you.